Hi, this is the fourth part of a tutorial on creating a custom CRM application using a low-code, no-code platform, DaDaBIK. In the first part, we created an enterprise-ready custom CRM application without writing any PHP, JavaScript, or SQL code. It was a no-code app, but it was already a complete application that you could use to register leads and prospects, convert them into customers, and perform the typical tasks you do on a CRM application. In the second part and in the third part, we started the low-code development. I showed you how to add your own custom code to improve the application. Calculated fields, custom validation functions, conditional fields, views, hooks, and more. In this fourth part, I will continue the low-code development and I will show you custom buttons. I thought this should have been the last episode of this tutorial and wanted to discuss here custom buttons, custom PHP pages, and how to add your custom JavaScript code. But I realized there is definitely material for at least 3 distinct episodes. And also 3 episodes make searching easier. So we will only see custom buttons today. Before continuing, remember, if you're interested in the no-code, low-code world, to click on subscribe and then hit the notification bell if you want to be notified about new videos and lives. Every other Thursday we publish a new video, and the first Monday of each month we have a live. So let's start with the topic, today's topic, custom buttons. I like to think about custom buttons as one of the automation elements you have with DaDaBIK, together with email alerts and operational hooks. With custom buttons, you can place in several places of your application buttons that, when clicked, trigger the execution of some custom PHP or JavaScript code. Let me show an example. As you know, in DaDaBIK, when we create a table or a view, we automatically get the default buttons we use to perform the CRUD actions. So, for example, in customers, here we are in the edit form of a record. We are modifying a customer, in particular a prospect. We have the save, save plus go back. Since it's a master details, we have create new item on communications. We have the show revisions button. And if we go back, several other buttons. These are buttons created by default according to your permission settings. So if the current user doesn't have permissions for delete, for example, obviously the delete button is not displayed. And again, these are default buttons created by DaDaBIK according to your settings. But now we talk about custom buttons. So let me go to prospects and let's edit a prospect. If you don't see the edit button here, it's probably because we set edit permission to no in one of the previous episodes. So for this episode, I set it back to yes. So edit, here we are. This additional button is not a default button, it's a custom button. We created it and we linked to the execution of some code. That is not a standard CRUD operation, it's just something that reflects our specific workflow. So a prospect has a status. We can change the status from here. For example, if we want to change the status from prospect to customer, we can do it. We can set it here and then save. But we wanted to make things easier for our users and we created a specific button, then in one click converts the status from prospect to customer. That's it. Let's see if it works. Okay, so now the record, the person, is now a customer. As I always say, even in this case, it's custom code. In particular, here is custom PHP code. So in this case, we only change the status, but you can do whatever you want. You can send an email, you can call an external API, you can read data from your database. It's up to you. So in a moment, I will explain how to add that button. But let me show first where you can add a custom button in DaDaBIK. Let me convert this back to customer. And to prospect. And okay, so this is one of the places where you can put a custom button on the top of the edit form. And you can place one or more buttons here. You can also display your custom buttons close to each of the fields of a form. For example, here we set DaDaBIK to show a custom button close to the last name field. So for any form, edit form, insert form, search form, and also the details page, you can decide to display buttons on the top of the form and or close to a specific field. This is independently for each form and table view. So if you set a button to appear only on the top of the edit form prospects view, the button will not appear on the other forms or for the other tables and views. The other main place where you can display custom buttons is the results grid. Even in this case, you have two options. You can display it at the top of the results grid or on each row. So let me go back to the results grid. Okay, top of the results grid or row. Okay, for each row, well, now we have just one row, but you will get one button for each row. Of course, the position depends a lot on the action you want to execute. If you display a button on a row, you probably want to execute an action on that row, on that record. If you put your button on the top of the results grid, you probably want to execute a function on the whole record set or on some specific records. For example, here I could select some records and then do something on the selected records using my own custom code. What we are going to implement in this tutorial is the convert this prospect button. So when you click here, this prospect will be converted to a customer. So to define a custom button, we have to open the custombuttons.php file and add some configuration lines. I think the easiest way for you is to open the DaDaBIK documentation. We are in the custom buttons chapter here, and we copy and paste the example provided by the documentation. This is an example of custom button configuration. We paste it here in our custombuttons.php file, and then we will edit these settings, these parameters, according to our use case. Before proceeding, however, you also need to add in your config custom file enable custom button functions equal to 1, because by default custom buttons are not enabled. Okay, so you should do that. Then we come back here and let's look at the code. If this code looks confusing, don't worry, in a few minutes it will be very clear. Basically, for each button you want to add to your application, you need this block of code. Each of these lines configures a specific aspect of your button. Technically, in PHP, this is an associative array. The key you see here is the table or view you want to link the button to. So here we are creating a button in the table or view customers. But this was the example we took from the DaDaBIK documentation. In our case, we want to create the button on the on a view, the view prospects. So first of all, we have to change the key. So prospects. All right. Okay, so let's explain each parameter now. The first one is type. Don't worry about this. You can just keep it as it is. It's just a counter, because for each table or view you can have more than one button, so we need an additional index, but you don't have to do anything here. So type, we have three possible types: JavaScript, PHP standard, and PHP Ajax. So this was in the documentation a JavaScript button. This means that when you click this button, some JavaScript code that you need to provide will be executed. PHP standard, instead of executing JavaScript code, it will execute PHP code by loading a page in the application. The PHP Ajax type again executes PHP code, but asynchronously, okay, using Ajax. We will use PHP standard for our example. Then callback function. This is the name of the function, JavaScript function or PHP function, that must be executed when the user clicks on the button. We can call it DaDaBIK change status. You can use the name you want. By default, it needs to start with DaDaBIK underscore. Permission needed. So here we need to set the permission the user needs in order to see and use the button. In our case, we allow the status change only to users having the edit permissions on prospects. Okay, so here, edit. If a user doesn't have edit permissions, that user will not see the button. Obviously, all the possible settings you can have here are explained in the documentation. Again, we are in the custom buttons chapter. So for permission needed, for example, you can have none, so the button is always displayed. We have read, you need to read permissions, delete, edit, insert, details, or custom function. So sometimes you need a very peculiar rule for your button to appear, to be used. In that case, you need to use custom function here in permission needed, and you also need to provide that function. Okay, so let me tell you an example. For example, you want to show a particular button only to users belonging to the group 3 and only the first Monday of the month. Okay, well, you can write a function, and you code your logic in the function, and your function according to your logic again, returns true or false. True means show the button to the user. False, don't show. In case you have custom function here, then you would need an additional parameter, permission custom function, and here you will add your function name. For example, DaDaBIK change status permission. Okay, so in this case, later when you're done here, you need to write the code, well, for the DaDaBIK change status function and for the DaDaBIK change status permission function. But in our case, permission needed is edit, so we don't need a custom permission function. Then show in. So here we define where we want to show our button. In our case is in the edit form. You have many other options as we discussed before: edit form, details page, insert form, search form, results grid. Okay, and you can also add multiple values. So if I want to show this button but in the edit form and for some reason in the search form, I can do something like this. Okay, position. With forms, we have two options here. We can choose top, so at the top of the edit form, or if you want to display the button close to a field, you write the name of the field here. In our case, it's top. Label of the button. So we have two parameters dedicated to the label. The first one is the label type. The label type that can be fixed or language file. So fixed means that regardless of the language, what you have here in label will always be used as label. So that is our case, just to simplify the coding, the tutorial. And we said convert this prospect. This will be our label. Otherwise, if you choose language file, here you have to use a key that in turns you must use in your language custom file files where you will provide translations for each language. All right, and then style. Here you can add some CSS. For example, here in the example we had the background and the width, but it's up to you. And finally, ID. This is optional. We can also remove this part. In our case, in our example, it's not very useful, but if you use ID here, DaDaBIK will assign an ID to the HTML element representing the button. So maybe you need an ID to manipulate in some ways the button itself. We don't need it, so we remove this parameter. So let's see if it works. Let's go back here. Let's reload. All right. Well, now it's black just because the style here was background black 000, but the button has been displayed. If I clicked the button without having defined my function, DaDaBIK change status, of course, it won't work. I have to define my function with my code, my logic first. And this is what we are going to do now. So this is the first draft of our function. We will refine it later. So the name of our callback function was DaDaBIK change status, so I need to define a DaDaBIK change status function. Here, according to your button type and position, you will receive in input as parameter some values. For PHP button related to a specific record, as in our case, we will receive, obviously you can read everything in the documentation. You will receive the name of the table, well, it will be customers in this case, prospects in this case, PK field. This is the unique field name of the table, the one you set from pages. The unique field of the table typically is the primary key, and PK value, the value of that field, because again we have the button on a specific record. So if you know the value of the unique field, you can reach that record. I mean, the combination of table name, PK field and PK value allows you to go straight to the record in the database. Okay, then let's see what we do here. So global, well, this is basically the execution of an update SQL statement. So as you can see, we use prepared statements. If you have seen if you have watched the previous parts of this tutorial, probably you are familiar with this technique. Anyway, we have to use the global variable $con, which represent the connection to our database that we always need if we want to execute queries on the main database. Then we define the SQL statement. So what we want to do is we want to update the status from prospect to customer for a prospect having a specific ID. And this is our update statement. So maybe you're wondering why we are updating customers and not prospects. Well, prospects is just a view, and if you remember, is defined as, you know, all the customers having status equal to prospects. But the ID of the prospect will be the ID you see in the prospects view for a specific prospect is exactly the same ID that prospect has in the customers table. So it's exactly the same thing, updating the customers table or the prospects table. Okay, so you can execute updates on views. However, you have a few limitations. So depending on the views, you may be able or not to execute an update query. I don't want to go into these details in this tutorial, so I will update the customers table here. Even if, at least if you use MySQL, this would work as well. Okay, so update customers, set status equal to customer, where ID equal to column ID. This is a placeholder, and then using bind paramdb, we will assign to this placeholder PK value, that is the value of the ID of the customer, basically. Okay, so if we are in the edit form of the customer or prospect, in this case having ID 3, pk value will be 3 and 3 will be used here. And finally, we execute the SQL statement. Okay, let's see if it works. So we are, you can see it here, for example, where value equals 5. So basically we are editing the prospect having ID 5 that also has ID 5 in the customers table. If I click on convert this prospect, we will get a blank page and we will see why. But if we go to all customers to see all the customers, all right, now we can see Ted Red that was a prospect and now is a customer. And in fact, in the, well, exactly, the prospects table, the prospects view, sorry, is now empty. Okay, let's convert this back to prospect because we want to do something more now. Okay, we got a blank page, so let's do something for that, but let me add a couple of notes before continuing. The first note is here we use the ID that was the unique field name for customers because we knew that ID was the unique field of customers. However, we received this information from here, PK field. So if you want to be more ready for future changes, maybe you are going to change the unique field of the table. Instead of hard coding the field name here, you can use PK field. And that is the first note. The second note is that these 5 lines will soon become just one line. Starting from DaDaBIK 11.7, we introduced custom code API. So basically the idea is if and when you need to add your custom code to reduce and simplify as much as possible the code, we have some APIs provided by DaDaBIK. For the moment, we only have one method. It's called getRecordDetails and allows to read the content of a record without explicitly executing a select SQL statement. We'll soon have another method to update the content of a record without explicitly execute an update query as we did here. Even when you'll have these methods, you can still use a standard PHP code if you want, if you need more control or if you just prefer. But you will have another easier option. So after the execution of the update statement, we want to go back to our edit form, right? And this is the code we will use. Let me discuss it. So basically it's a redirect statement, let's call it like that. Technically in PHP, header will send an HTTP header and a header starting with the location column and then a URL. Basically we load this specific page into the browser. So how can you know the URL you want to use? Well, you can just copy the URL from here because basically you want to go here, right? So you can just copy and modify this URL. So it's index.php, table name equals prospects, function equals edit, where field equals ID, where value equals 5. this is the URL of the edit form of a specific record, the one having ID 5 of the view prospects. Well, I would say there are two differences with the URL we need to use. The first one is the table name, because when you will load this page, the person is not a prospect anymore. It will be a customer, or better, a converted leads. Because if you remember, we also have a specific view showing only people having status equal to customer, while all customers, of course, shows the table customers. This is not a view, so regardless of the status. So instead of table name prospects, table name converted leads. Then function is edit, where field is ID. Again, we could use PK field if you want, and where value is what we get here as PK value. When you pass values in your URLs, those values must be URL encoded. So that's why I use URL encode PK value. And finally, exit, because we want to redirect the user to another page and stop the execution of any code in the current page. Okay, let's see if it works. Perfect. So we are now in the converted leads view, and TED-RED is now a customer. Even for this, we will have soon an API method. In this case, it's just one line of code, so you don't save much. But if you're not a coder, this syntax may be confusing. So we will have a redirect method where we just tell the table, the page, and the ID value. So it will be probably easier to write. Okay, one more thing. DaDaBIK, to preserve data integrity, implements a locking mechanism. When you edit a record, you lock that record, and other users cannot modify the content of the record using DaDaBIK while you are locking it. If you want to know more about how record locking works, there is a specific video about it. I will put the link in the description of this video. So how is this related to custom buttons? Well, it is related to this custom button we implemented, and I will show you how. So, for example, here, let's say that I enter again this record, TED-RED. So now I'm locking this record. Nobody can modify it using DaDaBIK. So, for example, if now I'm logged in as root in another browser, I'm logged in as Jimmy, and if I try to edit TED-RED, I got this message. The item is locked by user root. When I decide to go back to the results grid, the lock is released. All right, so if I come back here and reload, okay, now Jimmy can modify the record. But what happens if I, edit a record? Okay, now it's locked by Jimmy. Let me release the lock. What happens if I open this edit page and then I forget about it? Maybe I just leave this page open and I start to do something else. This is dangerous because you would keep the lock and nobody will be able to modify the record. So DaDaBIK has an automatic lock release feature. After a while, the lock is released anyway. And there is a configuration parameter you can use to set the amount of time. That seems very good. However, what happens if I come back? So I left the page open, then after a while I come back and I click save after having lost the lock. I would get an error because in order to save, you need an active lock. If you have lost the lock, maybe someone else has modified the record, and what you see does not reflect anymore the real status for the record itself. This error message you get is produced automatically by DaDaBIK. So again, so far so good. Everything seems correct, and you don't have to do anything basically. This for the normal edit operations. But when you add your own custom code, DaDaBIK obviously doesn't know what you're trying to do with your custom button. So this check, the last one I mentioned, the one that requires an active lock to save, is not done automatically. And in your custom button, you want to mimic the DaDaBIK behavior in your code. And it's very easy to do it because there is a specific DaDaBIK function for that. So this is the code I added before executing my query. This is this DaDaBIK function, check, refresh, record lock. You can call it, you pass the table name, the unique field and the unique value, and DaDaBIK checks if the current logged in user is locking this record. If the user is locking the record, the lock is refreshed. So the timer starts from 0. Remember the amount of time after which the lock is released. That timer is reset. If it's false, if you get false, it means the user is not locking that record. So probably the user lost the lock. So it's safer not to continue and just to exit. So die, you have lost the record lock, please refresh the page and try again. That's what you need to do. If we want, we can try our code here. So basically, let me do so now TED-RED is a customer. Let's set it back to prospect. Okay, so now we are locking the record. Okay, so if I click here, everything will work as expected. But if we wait for a while, we will lose the lock and the system will display an error, the one we just set in our code. However, I don't want to sit down and wait for the release, so I will force the release deleting a record directly from the database. This is not something you should do. So in the database there is DaDaBIK locked records, contains the records that are locked in this moment, just one, the prospect having ID 5. If I delete, again, this is not something you should do. If I delete this record, the lock is released. No more lock. So here, if I click convert, I got the error. All right. The error message is not very good. It's not completely correct. If I refresh the page, this page is not anymore the edit page. Is the page of our custom function, the one we are executing because of because we clicked on the button. So refreshing now won't work. what we have to what we have to do is enter again in edit mode the prospect and click here. Okay, and now it works. Let me clarify one more thing. We said the record is locked when you open the edit page, right? But for example, it's not locked if you open the details page. So converted leads, this one. This is a details page. So it's not locked when you open the details page, because in the details page, you typically just read some data. So if you put a button on the top of the details page, the code we added before, this one, is not needed, because the record is not locked. If you plan to change the data of your record using a button, however, I advise to do it from the edit form, because you have by default this locking mechanism. Alright, this is all I wanted to discuss about custom buttons. You can find additional details on the documentation. Next time we will talk about JavaScript, and we will see how to add your JavaScript code using custom buttons again and JavaScript event functions. So that's it for today. See you next time. Ciao!